Now, I think I heard once that Toronto, have you heard this? Toronto means 3 rivers in Iroquois, but I actually wondered if it meant hate me. Coming up, how did Canada's biggest city become our biggest punching bag? Has gripped the nation. You know, something to bond us in a deeply emotional way. It's kind of a national sport, if you will, but it's not hockey. And it's not complaining about the weather. It's hating Toronto. A new documentary searches for answers behind this phenomenon. And the filmmaker, Albert Nernberg, is here to tell us about it. Hey, Albert. Nice to see you again. A fellow former Montrealers. Also with us, now, his real name is Robert Spence, but he is such a champion of Hogtown that they call him Mr.Toronto. Am I right?
Mr. Toronto.
Mr. Toronto. It's a pleasure to meet you. All right, so guys, we're going to take a peek at your film, so we're all up to speed. Here's Let's Hate Toronto.
How do you address the idea that in the rest of Canada it seems to be a national joke to hate Toronto? I'm thinking about doing something that's called the Toronto Appreciation Tour.
Mr. Toronto, I'm a Torontonian who can't believe that the rest of Canada could hate this beloved city of mine, so I'm out on the road. Check me out in a city near you.
It doesn't matter whether you're French or English. Everyone can hate Toronto.
Does Canada hate Toronto?
I have to say yes.
So what did you find out, Albert? What is the answer? Why do Canadians hate Toronto?
I wish there was like an easy answer, but the truth is that, you know, it's funny. In some places they hate Toronto because it's too big. Some places they hate it because it's too small. Some places they hate it because it's too multicultural. Some because it's too white. So there's sort of a feeling that Toronto, doesn't really matter what Toronto does, people are still going to be upset with it.
It's doomed to fail. Why the crusade, Mr. Toronto? Why the moniker and this campaign?
Somebody has to stand up for Toronto. It's in this country, the whipping boy of Canada is Toronto. We're always the butt of jokes across the country. Toronto sucks is an actual Canadianism. It's a real expression across Canada from coast to coast. And you know what? Toronto is a world-class city. It's the best city in Canada. And it's and somebody has to, you know, somebody has to go out there, and what we did was that we had Toronto Appreciation Days across the country to start a dialogue about this. It's as if, you know, there's a star basketball player and nobody will pass him the ball.
Okay. That's a strong defense.
It makes me sick.
Can you paint?
It makes me angry.
I can.
No, you don't want to get him too angry.
No, I don't want to get you too angry. So, okay, paint me some pictures of who, you know, in Vancouver, what's their issue? In Charlottetown, I mean, who? Because you said there isn't one particular gripe.
That's a very good question. In Montreal, I would say, if you start in Montreal, you'd say they see Toronto as a sort of stodgy city, a little bit lacking in culture. They see it sort of as a bunch of hosers. Yeah. If you go further west, in Calgary, they just see it as kind of protected industry. We're a socialist.
Hoarding all the money?
Hoarding all the money, a bunch of bankers. You get to Vancouver, and they hate Toronto mainly because of one of the reasons, the Toronto Maple Leafs. They feel they're forced to watch Maple Leafs games against their will, and as you know, the Toronto Maple Leafs...
because they're lazy pot smokers who resent people who get the job done. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Get a job, Vancouver. Stop kayaking and run the country like we do. Try being the economic engine of this country. Try running Canada without Toronto. The place will go down the tube.
Boy, his words, not mine. What about Torontonians? Because I know you and I lived in Montreal at the same time, and I think we both kind of dreaded moving to Toronto, which for people working in media in English Montreal sometimes feels like an inevitability.
Yes.
So what about people who move to Toronto sometimes against their will or their better judgment, but just because it's going to pay the rent. What about Torontonians who don't like being here?
When we were ranking what's the #1, Toronto-hating city, of course, Vancouver hit the top. I understand that Barrie, Ontario didn't do so badly, actually. but actually, Toronto itself initially came in as #3. So Torontonians are big Toronto haters. And it's not just Torontonians from outside Toronto. It's actually Torontonians who've been here a long time tend to resent Toronto. And I have no real explanation for it, except the traffic, maybe.
You know what? I had an interesting experience last year shooting a show for CBC called Code Green. I was in 12 different cities. 3 different times throughout the winter. And many of them were places I hadn't ever been to before. For one reason or another, I'd never been to Regina, to Saskatoon, to Kelowna, all these places. And I have to say, I certainly spent lots of time outside Toronto, but it was the first time I had a real sense of what people mean when people from the rest of the country or from outside Toronto really vilify Toronto, because I could sort of see it from their perspective. And I came to sort of realize, in a way I hadn't before, it's almost like Toronto is an American city located just inside the Canadian border.
You said it.
And as my uncle says, when he sells people from Europe or somewhere else to visit Canada, he says, don't go to Toronto, because that's not really Canada. The rest of our country is Canada, and Toronto's like kind of an American city. Your response?
Poppycock. Poppycock. You know what? I think we should take a page out of the Americans' books. In America, the expression is, I love New York. In Canada, it's Toronto sucks.
All right.
And how I go to different places in the country, I tell them I'm from Toronto. The first thing they say to me is, Toronto sucks.
It's true. We actually timed people. We put up our sign, and it was always less than a minute. In every city in Canada, someone would shout, Toronto sucks, the minute we put up our sign. So it's true.
Is that because in Canada it's that tall poppy syndrome? We love to lop off whoever's sort of sticking their neck out of the head?
It's a huge sign of insecurity.
He has a theory, actually, that Toronto is actually too sexy for Canada. That it's such a sexy
Have you
city.
been to Montreal? Come on.
Montreal is sexy if, if they weren't drunk and in a gutter somewhere.
So are you live in Toronto, you must be a huge Leafs fan. Are the Leafs your thing?
You shouldn't mention, I don't know if you want to mention the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's sort of a sore point with Mr. Toronto.
I don't want to talk about the Leafs. I'm sorry, Jill. We just need to not talk about that right now.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Toronto, for being here. I'm a Habs fan. If that helps. Oh no!
God! 4 years! Why did they win?
Thank you, Albert and Mr. Toronto, for helping us understand what truly unites our country. Clearly, maple syrup and hockey be damned. It's all about Toronto bashing, rightly or wrongly. My guests today, Mr. Toronto, Under the Table, Robert Spence, and Albert Nirenberg. And their film is called Let's All Have Hate Toronto. It's on the festival circuit now, and it's opening in major cities soon. Coming up next, something else to hate, celebrities. Pop culture diva Arissa Cox will be here talking about famous people we love to loathe. Who's yours?